Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan, and I have big news. The Star Wars Sequel Trilogy is actually better than you think. And by the end of this video, I think you're going to agree with me that it does have a strong central theme that actually reflects the times we live in. That's right, the Sequel Trilogy actually makes sense.
Oh, person, are we shilling for Disney right now? When do I get my Disney check?
Oh, no, we are not shilling for Disney. And you guys know, I have made numerous videos blasting the rise of Skywalker. I even created a puppet of J.J. Abrams so I could vent my frustrations to someone. You make bad movies. Nobody likes you, you have no friends because But the thing is, guys, these are all well-made movies. Arguably, they're better films than the prequels.
I don't like sand.
What a super weird thing to say that came out of nowhere.
But maybe they're not better Star Wars films. But before we get rolling, I do want to remind you guys that our ScreenCrush live show is on tour right now. We just have a few cities left. We're going to be in Philadelphia on February 2nd, and then we have 3 dates in March. We're going to be in Atlanta, Charlotte, and Orlando. Guys, the live shows are so much fun. It's Pee-wee's Playhouse for Nerds. We do all sorts of exclusive breakdowns and special guests, and frankly, I'm not even sure where the show is going to go most of the time.
How the did Darcy deal with the duck's corkscrew-shaped
How did they do
penis?
that?
It's a lot of fun. Ticket links are below, and I can't wait to meet you in person. Now, later in the video, I am going to focus on the rise of Skywalker because that's the Star Wars movie that I like the least.
If you're saying I play favorites, you're wrong. I love all my children equally. I don't care for Joe.
Oh yeah, I thought the last one was the best one. Palpatine came back, they got to kick some butt. It was really cool.
Well, you kind of just proved my point. I mean, yes, you're an idiot. You don't understand the nuances of how Palpatine came back. You just wanted to have fun at the theater. So the movie worked for, you know, some people. I think all 3 of these movies succeed in what actually makes for a good movie. The visuals, the acting, the storytelling, and the theme. For instance, A New Hope had great special effects, 3 charismatic leads, Lucas's faster, more intense style kept the plot moving forward, and most importantly, the movie's theme of rebellion resonated with the counterculture movement of the country and helped the nation heal after the 1960s. It's also interesting, though, to see the backlash against the sequel trilogy and to remember what it was like in the early 2000s when people hated the prequels. I mean, hated them, like drove Jar Jar actor Amon Best to near suicide hated them. But prequel babies like Doug grew up and all of a sudden we now have prequel nostalgia.
Yeah, you know, I always liked Jar Jar. I can't help it. I think he's funny.
Well, I like to say that the prequels were a great story poorly told, and the sequel trilogy is a bad story but well told. But I think I was wrong about that. As disjointed as this trilogy feels, it does have a common through line. Both J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson, I believe, felt as if they were finishing the story of Han, Luke, and Leia. Each of these movies focuses on a different character from the original trilogy, and it focuses on that character being redeemed for their mistakes. So let's start with Force Awakens. Yes, it is a remake of A New Hope, but they did that on purpose for a specific reason. After the prequels, they were trying to win fans back, you know, fans of the original trilogy. That's why Hux dismisses a clone army.
Perhaps Leader Snoke should consider using a clone army.
My men are exceptionally trained, programmed from birth.
And why the very first words spoken in this trilogy are...
This will begin to make things right.
J.J. Abrams did the same thing with the Star Trek movies. After the boring, plotting wreck of Star Trek Nemesis, he stripped down the franchise to what general fans knew about it, Kirk and Spock. Hell, even the scene where Kirk sleeps with a green woman is probably just a reference to this.
Then Kirk will anybody. I seen him beam down the planet. Ever see the episode he this green?
Now, this is not the direction I wanted to see the Star Wars franchise go, but this actual movie works great. The cast is outstanding. I think this is actually the best assembly of actors ever put together for a Star Wars film. J.J. Abrams also gave us the best blend of CGI and practical effects we've seen since the movie Titanic. I mean, seriously, you look at a lot of the work churned out by overworked post houses, and this movie's effects are immaculate. Now, one thing we're always careful about here on ScreenCrush is to make sure that we double check our sources, and we always make sure that we're giving you the real facts, because let's face it, the internet is filled with fake news because the media's profit bias has divided us up into separate camps, and the real news is often hidden behind an algorithm. And that's why I've been using Straight Arrow News, the sponsor of this video. Straight Arrow News is an app and website that shows you all the stories with facts free of bias. Plus, it's free, so there's no paywall to stay informed. Their journalists are separating themselves from any other news organization by not only highlighting left and right-leaning opinions, but also giving an unbiased view of stories and events across all sides of the aisle. Certain stories have a gauge that show you the story's media landscape reporting, so you can see which way your story's bias is leaning. Straight Arrow News keeps you informed with the real news in real time. I especially love their Media Mist tool that allows me to discover what stories are being underreported in the media. For instance, I had no idea that the Justice Department leaked investigation details before the election, or that allegedly Trump's team were fed questions before an interview that was conducted by Fox News during the election. These are major news stories that get buried underneath the media algorithms that are just trying to pit us against each other. You see, I'm tired of media organizations using wedge issues to divide us, to drive up engagement and pump us full of fear so we'll constantly tune in. Straight Arrow News cuts through all of that bias and fear-mongering and gives you the straight facts, the sources, and just lets you stay informed. I also love their video stories. They're well edited, straight to the point, and a great way to summarize news if I'm cleaning up or getting ready in the morning. So go to san.com/ScreenCrush to check it out for yourself. You can visit by clicking my link in the description or download the app by searching Straight Arrow News. When you download, you not only support our channel, but you're also supporting a free platform created by a group of journalists that are diligent and vigilant about fact-based news and focusing on serving you the truth. Now back to what I was saying. But I also love the design aesthetic of the movie and how it fits into the Star Wars saga. You see, the prequels are a metaphor about the fall of the Roman Republic. The original trilogy was about the fall of the Roman Empire. And, historically, after the Roman Empire fell, next came the Dark Ages. You know, that medieval period when we think of knights and castles and wizards. And we see this concept permeate the production design of The Force Awakens. Kylo Ren leads the Knights of Ren. He wears a medieval tunic and he carries a crossguard saber like a medieval sword. There's also Maz Kanata's castle with its medieval banners. Luke, at the end, takes on the appearance of a haggard old wizard, you know, like Merlin. And we even see Rey pull the sword from the snow like Arthur pulling Excalibur from the stone. And yes, it is really stupid that the Empire is just back now.
Why are you here?
But J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan said that their premise was, what if the Nazis hid out in Argentina and then returned? Now yes, this does take away from the victory in Return of the Jedi, but that's life, isn't it? I mean, the political party you hate always gets back into office, just like night always follows day. The trilogy's premise here is that evil is cyclical, and if we're not careful, that evil we thought we defeated is going to come back. See, this is why Han has such a central role in this film. He believes that he failed as a father, so he reverts back to his old pre-father lifestyle.
I went back to the only thing I was ever any good at.
Han's arc is to realize that he can't leave behind everything he fought for. So he comes back to fight the new Death Star and to fight for his son. And as far as the movie being a copy of A New Hope, so is The Phantom Menace, and a lot of people like Doug here love that movie.
That's true, I really do like that movie.
I mean, hell, A New Hope is actually a copy of many different genres and films. The difference is A New Hope hit it better by combining lots of different things into one very new feeling thing. But look guys, The Force Awakens and all of the sequel trilogy movies are actually Star Wars movies that are about Star Wars movies, especially The Last Jedi. Now look, a lot of digital ink has already been spilled on this movie, and much better film scholars than myself have defended it or torn it down. I, for one, love the movie, but I don't necessarily think it was the right Star Wars movie for its time and place. It sounds weird to distinguish it this way, but I think there's a difference between the two. I think some movies are good movies, and other movies are good Star Wars movies. For instance, Attack of the Clones, not a good movie, but it's a good Star Wars movie, whereas most movies in the sequel trilogy work great as movies, but not so well as Star Wars movies. You see, The Last Jedi, like The Empire Strikes Back, is about failure. The movie focuses on Luke's failure as a mentor, but also other characters like Poe, Finn, and Rose have to learn from their own failures to become better people. It's also, I think, the most visually stunning Star Wars film. You have the large spectacle shots like the Holdo maneuver, but also Johnson places the camera in these intimate spaces, directly in the characters' eye lines. And that Praetorian Guard fight is the best choreographed fight in Star Wars. Now, I will say that the movie was hindered by the cliffhanger at the end of The Force Awakens. We could not have any sort of time skip, and we had to pick up just moments after the last movie ended. And frankly, Johnson's message about moving on from the original trilogy was heavy-handed.
The Sith, the Jedi, the Rebels, let it all die.
But the movie also commits two masterstrokes that altered the direction of Star Wars. Killing Snoke, which nobody saw coming, and also Rey Nobody.
You have no place in this story. You come from nothing. You're nothing.
In fact, it still breaks my heart that J.J. Abrams undid this reveal. So now, let's talk about The Rise of Skywalker, why it's not as bad as you think, and why, when you view the whole of this trilogy, its stupidest decisions actually makes sense. Now, I want to make it clear, I do not like this movie, but that's because I don't think it's a fitting into the Skywalker saga. But this actually is a well-made film, made by a director who is working at the top of his craft. Now, that being said though, I still got to run through all the really stupid things in this film. I'm sorry, but I need you to know that I understand what doesn't work here. For instance, there's the dagger lining up with the wreckage, the fake Chewbacca death, this line.
Leia knew it too.
Rey just giving up, Rey being a Palpatine, and how that suddenly gave her an arc of being afraid of her darkness that was not present in either of her other movies. There's also the Sith Eternal Choir, the fact that Ben died, Rey Skywalker at the end, and also why would Palpatine say this line, "I am all the Sith"? Unless it was, of course, to set up Rey's next line.
I'm all the Jedi.
Also, my nerdiest nitpick, Chewbacca didn't get a medal in A New Hope because Wookiee honor demands that he not accept one. But Maz Kanata still does this.
This is for you.
So giving Chewie the medal is the kind of stupid ending that somebody would write if they only knew about Star Wars from memes, but never actually dove into the lore. And to be honest, guys, I really like that Palpatine is a Force vampire, and I don't even mind that he comes back. Now, the way he comes back is stupid. It would have made more sense if his spirit, attached itself to Vader's helmet, or if his spirit attached itself to Luke, and then he, slowly influenced Luke over the years and caused him to mess up his Jedi Order. I even like the way the Sith artifact whispers to Kylo Ren. Now, to be fair, I do want to praise the many great things about this movie. J.J. Abrams is a great director. He's able to add in small moments that really make a scene pop. Like right here, near the beginning of the movie when the Falcon is tilting, Finn just jumps over a little barrel. It's a small touch, but it brings the scene to life. Whereas the prequels are the exact opposite. George Lucas's blue screen set seemed to dampen all of the energy in a scene.
Master Yoda, do you think it will really come to war?
Boring. Boring.
J.J. Abrams works great with actors, and these three leads have incredible chemistry. It's a blast getting to see them finally on a mission together.
You were a space runner? You were a stormtrooper?
Were you a spice runner?
Were you a scavenger? We could do this all night.
And C-3PO is just a delight.
You didn't say my name, sir, but I'm all right.
I also think that we overlook this line.
Her name is Nambi Gima.
That's an excellent name. I'm Rey.
And even this little exchange after Finn and Poe are both promoted.
General.
I also think that film history will forever remember this movie as the film that gave the world Babu Frick. Look, I could go on, but you get the idea. J.J. Abrams knows how to make a fun movie. So, if you were to walk into this film with no knowledge of other Star Wars films, I think this cast and the sense of humor make for a good time. Especially Billy D. Williams, who's just happy to be here.
Wookiees stand out in the crowd.
But Abrams is also an incredible visual director. I mean, the visuals in this movie are even better than The Force Awakens. The transition from the Sith Wayfinder to Kylo's ship is the kind of small detail that he adds in to keep the plot moving during the exposition-heavy first act. And that Rey face-off with Kylo's TIE Fighter is one of the best fight sequences in a Star Wars. It is tense, it is beautifully choreographed, and it's a terrific visual metaphor for the power of the machine versus the meditative strength of the Jedi. And look, it's a guilty pleasure, but Luke's spirit raising the X-Wing set to Yoda's theme, it's pretty cool. But the core of the movie is about Rey and Ben. The moment where Rey summons Force Lightning was absolute genius. The kind of game-changing Star Wars moment that you never see coming. And we've never really seen a Jedi on screen struggle with their dark side. I mean, Elzar Mann in the High Republic book struggles with his tendency toward the darkness, but we haven't ever really seen this explored well in the movies and shows. Anakin's turn was essentially a light switch, but here Rey is really struggling. She's afraid she might slip to the dark side. It was never really a concern for Luke right up until the moment he almost turned. It was also great to see Adam Driver get to cut loose. Like, the small amount of time that Ben Solo has in the movie is so much fun. And of course, there's the moment where he and Rey finally work in tandem and he turns against the Knights of Ren. But the real reason you bought a ticket was for their sexual chemistry. I mean, this movie's supposed to be for 12-year-olds, not 13-year-olds. Now, one of my biggest criticisms about Rise of Skywalker is that JJ retcons so much of The Last Jedi, but that's not entirely true. He did make Rey a Palpatine, which is bogus and sad, and I'll never forgive him for it, but he also took their connection established in The Last Jedi, and he made them into a Force dyad, which goes all the way back to Palpatine wanting to use Anakin's power in the Force to make himself immortal.
To cheat death is a power only one has achieved. But if we work together, I know we can discover the secret.
He also continued the gag that Hux is an inept dipshit. Like in his first movie, he was Hitler light.
All remaining systems will bow to the First Order!
But then Johnson turned him into a joke.
Supremely...
and JJ kept that joke going.
I'm the spy.
And the movie also added some great pieces to the canon. Now, we've seen the Star Wars monster trope many times. So, the idea of Rey force healing the monster put this idea on its head. Monsters are now just also creatures in the Force. I also love the introduction of force healing, and I love seeing that Luke did in fact train Leia, and that her decision to stop training was because she foresaw the death of her son. Now, I think this was an elegant solution to the movie's core handicap, which was the death of Carrie Fisher. We cannot overstate how much of a seismic blow this was to this trilogy and to this film. The first two films focused on Han and Luke, and this film was supposed to be Leia's chance to shine. In Colin Trevorrow's original draft of Episode 9, Leia spent the movie trying to reform old alliances to face the First Order, but J.J. Abrams then had to take unused Carrie Fisher deleted scenes from The Force Awakens, and I think he did a really good job writing new scenes around them.
Nothing's impossible. Tell me when you get back. Don't tell me what things look like. Tell me what they are.
Luke tells us,
Leia told me that she had sensed the death of her son at the end of her Jedi path.
So this means that for decades, Leia had known what her future was building towards. She had seen this moment. She knew she would have to sacrifice her life to save her son. This takes their little brief shared moment in The Last Jedi and it makes it even more tragic. There is one scene in this movie though that I love with all of my heart, and it is Rey and Kylo's fight on the Death Star. We just have to pretend that Finn isn't there. We made a video essay a few years back about the key duel in each trilogy and how each corresponds to a different element: fire, air, and water. So I see this duel as the opposite of the duel on Mustafar. Whereas that duel was embroiled in fire and was about Anakin's rage, this is the scene where that dark side anger finally cools with water. First, I love how intense this fight is. I've seen some online criticism about this fight, like how they act like the swords are so heavy, you know, in comparison to the heavily choreographed fights of the prequels. But the thing is, those prequel lightsaber duels are flashy, they're pretty, but they don't feel real. They're the WWE, while this duel is a straight up street fight.
Wait, wrestling's not real? John Cena lied to us?
So this style also lends its inspirations to combat with medieval broadswords, calling back to the medieval imagery of the sequels that I talked about earlier. It's also appropriate that they are fighting on the wreckage of this old metaphorical Roman Empire. But fight choreography aside, this fight was an elegant solution to deal with Carrie Fisher's death. From across the galaxy, she uses the last of her life force to purge the dark side from her son. And she knew that this was the only moment when this would have worked because she foresaw this moment decades ago. And her death, this final act of mercy, is what clears the dark side from Rey and leads her to win the fight through an act of mercy when she heals Kylo Ren. There's also something biblical here, like Anakin was the chosen one because of his virgin birth, you know, space Jesus. And yet, it's Leia who has to die for the sins of her father, while her son is then pierced in the side, like Christ. Even if Carrie Fisher had not passed away, I can't think of a better way to redeem Kylo Ren. Now, Harrison Ford does return in this scene, but I think he's there more as a stand-in for Carrie Fisher. After all, this movie is an end to this Star Wars saga as we know it. Like I said at the top of this video, the filmmakers were trying to conclude the story of Han, Luke, and Leia. But this all goes back to that theme that I mentioned earlier. This is a Star Wars movie that is about Star Wars movies.
Well, yeah, but what the heck does that even mean? I don't like when you get all conceptual like this.
Well, I'm about to get way conceptual, so buckle up. See, I think you can tell a lot about our culture by what movies are blockbusters at any given time. In the 40s, it was musicals because people wanted to forget the troubles of the war. In the 50s, we had these huge biblical epics to reflect a society that was seeking normalcy and tradition. The 60s were a transformational period that saw the fall of the giant musical lead into art films like The Graduate or 2001: A Space Odyssey. Suddenly those movies were topping the box office. And then the 70s saw people flock to theaters to see pictures about gangsters and natural disasters, which reflected the country's feeling on political corruption and the state of our economy and infrastructure. But then George Lucas tapped into the American desire for escapism, an idea that was already taking root in the late 70s through the popularity of silliness like disco, pet rocks, and smiley face t-shirts, and so on and so on. The 2000s saw movies that reflected the war on terror. We saw antagonists that were vague, disembodied threats like Voldemort, Sauron, or, you know, Palpatine's creation of an ambiguous war to gain power. And then the 2010s saw the rise of Marvel, where superheroes had to band together to stop a destructive force that attacked New York City. And there are patriotic undertones throughout the MCU that culminated in the forces of good finally reuniting to fight a specific named threat from space. In other words, for the past 20 years, America had wanted a clear enemy to fight, and we found that enemy in Thanos. Excuse me, I need this. So, I saw a post by author Jason Pargan recently that pointed out that when you watch episodes of The Office, a show that's 20 years old, the clothes and hairstyles of the people on that show haven't changed that much from today. I mean, just the technology, like the monitors and the phones that people use. But fashion and music have, like, radically changed in previous decades. Like, when I say picture somebody from the 60s, 70s, or 80s, you probably see very different looking hairstyles and clothes. But our pop music also hasn't evolved that much. Some of the hit songs today sound exactly like they could have come out 20 years ago. And I think this is because we now surround ourselves with the past. People can get away with wearing clothes from pretty much any decade. There are kids today that are into 80s properties like Transformers, in a way that kids in the 80s were definitely not absorbing properties from the 1940s. So everything that we consume now seems to be based on some pre-existing IP that has been mined to exploit nostalgia. So then we can, say, pass on our love of the Ninja Turtles to our kids. But now we live in what I call the requel era, where everything seems to be a reboot, prequel, or sequel. Everything that gets made now seems to be fully aware of everything that came before it. And let me give you a few examples. In the MCU, Deadpool and She-Hulk are, of course, self-referential.
Welcome to the MCU, by the way. You're joining at a bit of a low point.
But Marvel Studios itself has also become self-referential, returning to Robert Downey Jr. and the Russos for Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars. Or, like the Fast and Furious movies, they are now getting to a point that is so far and distant from the grounded reality of the first film that the characters have to call this out.
We've now been on insane missions, and I ain't got one single scar to show for it.
Or how The Matrix Resurrections was completely about what it means to make a Matrix sequel in this era.
Resurrecting you both was crazy expensive.
Now, we've always had sequels to blockbusters, but it used to be that those sequels were either tied to stars or to specific creative individuals. The thought was you couldn't do another Star Trek without Nimoy and Shatner, until you recast them twice. You couldn't do another Ghostbusters without the original team until they got too old, and then all of a sudden you could reboot the franchise. Or, more to the point, you couldn't make a Star Wars film without George Lucas until he sold the IP to Disney. See, George Lucas always looked at these movies differently from us. We all think we take Star Wars personally, but for George Lucas, these movies are personal. Now, I've talked in another video about how I think the prequels are about George Lucas's divorce, and of course the original films are all about him wanting to escape from his life in Modesto, California. So if George had made this sequel trilogy, they likely would have been still very personal to him. But instead, Lucasfilm hired two Gen X directors who grew up playing with Star Wars action figures. So there was no way they could have made a Star Wars trilogy that was not entirely about what it means to be a Star Wars fan. Consider this: every young character in these movies is a fan of the original trilogy characters.
Luke Skywalker. I thought he was a myth.
This is a Millennium Falcon. You're Han Solo.
I've never met a resistance fighter before.
Oh, this is what we look like. Some of us. Others look different.
The General, to me, she's royalty.
Well, she certainly is that.
Or remember this clip in the trailer?
It's true. The Force, the Jedi, all of it. It's all true.
That was effective because Han is talking to us, or to our kids, as well as to the characters in the scene. Kylo Ren is a Vader fanboy who cosplays as his idol and even keeps Vader collectibles around. So the first movie establishes that all these people are fans, but the second movie shows us how they have to learn to take the lead from their idols and to stop relying on this older generation to fix every problem for them. Hell, the movie even features kids playing with Star Wars action figures, showing us that the older stories can inspire us, but we have to take our own path forward. So the third movie finally shows the kids rising up to defeat the evil that their parents could not defeat. So this trilogy is about the kids finally redeeming the parents. Just as, on a metacultural level, it's about how Abrams and Johnson were trying to make a Star Wars trilogy that redeemed the franchise in the eyes of the prequel haters.
This will begin to make things right.
Now, I personally would have rather have seen a trilogy about the kids making the same mistakes as the old generation, but then learning from those mistakes to prevent the rise of a new evil. Instead, we got a trilogy that's much more reflective of our times that we live in. These movies focus on the actions of the original trilogy characters, and our new heroes are reacting to the actions that those characters took decades ago. The original trilogy characters are still driving the plot, especially after this moment.
somehow Palpatine returned.
So a movie franchise about characters reacting to the actions of people in older movies seems pretty apt for our requel era. Now ultimately though, this trilogy is about the way that we consume media. Is media mindless entertainment, or are we looking for something more? And I think these movies didn't connect with us because they were movies about movies. Instead of, you know, using the language of cinema to tell a new story, they told a story that is just about Star Wars stories. So the Star Wars franchise is now in this weird conversation with itself. Fan backlash over The Last Jedi prompted Rose's role to be cut down, and also the numerous other shifts that we've already talked about in this video. So this franchise was reacting to its fans in real time, reacting to us just as fans were reacting to the movies. And this is perfect for who we are today. Not a single action can happen without it being loaded into a social media site, everybody giving their 2 cents, new memes being created, new videos being created, new remixes. So these movies are actually the perfect franchise for our time. Everything now is a reference or an Easter egg. Everything is like a remixed video. Now, maybe these sequels were not the Star Wars that we needed, but they were the Star Wars we deserved.
Yeah, I like the parts of the movie with lightsabers. Those are fun.
Me too, buddy. Just a reminder, the ScreenCrush live show is on tour right now. You can find links to all the upcoming cities down in the description below. So what do you think about the Star Wars sequel trilogy? Under or overrated? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments or on Blue Sky, X, Twitter, and all that other stuff, or on our free to join Discord server, which is like the internet before it got awful. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.